Good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name's Jo Evans. I'm head of the employment team at Myerson Solicitors, and joined today by Jayne Marks from The Better People, who will be talking to us today as well. This is the first of a series of 4 webinars that we will be running between Myerson and The Better People, under the banner of getting the best out of your people in these remote times. It was announced last week that 60% of the UK workforce is still working at home. We do obviously now have the government's roadmap, which is hopefully going to take us out of these current strange restrictions, but it's going to be a journey that's going to take us months rather than weeks. And you'll all be aware that lots of organisations are looking at full or partial home working solutions for the long term. So this strange talking to each other through screens world is going to be continuing into the future and long past the pandemic. We've noticed at Myerson that lots of our clients, particularly recently, have been talking to us about how they are struggling to engage with their employees through screens. And I think perhaps it's got even harder in recent weeks as the lockdown has really started to drag on. So we've organised these sessions, and hopefully they're a good opportunity to think about how to re-engage with our people and keep our people motivated, even though we're dealing with them remotely for the foreseeable future. So that's the purpose of the sessions today and the next 3 as well. A couple of housekeeping points briefly before we start. The session will last about 20 minutes, and then there'll be time for questions at the end. Please do put any questions that you've got through the Q&A function in the bottom of Zoom, and we'll pick these up at the end. We are recording today's event, but that means we can send it round to you afterwards, and you'll be able to access it through the Myerson YouTube channel afterwards. And we will also let you have the slides afterwards as well. So, turning to today's webinar, how to keep your team motivated and engaged as lockdown continues is the title for today. And I'm really pleased to introduce you to Jayne Marks of the Better People, who's going to be talking to us about this today. We at Myerson have been working with the Better People on various occasions over recent years. We always find them extremely helpful, engaging, and providing us with lots of very useful tips and insights. So really looking forward to today's session. They are specialists at improving employee performance, improving team efficiency and communications, and they've obviously been doing a lot of work in recent months about how to achieve improvements through remote working as well. So I will hand over to Jayne at this point, and she will take us through today's session, how to keep your team motivated and engaged as lockdown continues. Jayne, thanks very much.
Jo, thank you for such a lovely introduction. And I'm just going to do a quick check with you before you unmute. Can you hear me okay and see me okay, Jo? Amazing. Thank you so much, Jo. That's a massive welcome and big shoes to follow now from Jo's fantastic welcome to me. We very much want to work with you today, as Jo has said, to provide you with some tools, tips and strategies with how to keep your people engaged and motivated. And as Jo has said, we've had the opportunity to work with Myerson over the years on many topics. As I was preparing for today, I was just reflecting on what might be most helpful to all of you, whether you're a business owner, a HR manager, whether you're from a large, medium or smaller company. People are the most important assets to our organisation. I, throughout my career over the last 30 years, have only ever worked remotely. So it was really interesting for me to start to think about what my experience has been through those years as a member of a team, but also as a manager and a leader in a business as well. So I want to share some of my own personal experiences with you, things that have worked along the years for me, so that you get those practical tools and tips to walk away with today. So I just want to stop for a moment and ask you this question. When you think about your people or people who work from home, do you consider that they are less motivated than people who work face-to-face in an office? Just take a minute to think about that for yourself, because it's a really important factor when we're a leader or a business owner. What we think or believe has a massive impact in how we show up at work. So interestingly here, I'm sharing with you a survey that's been being conducted by the Harvard Business Review since the global pandemic started back in April last year. And to date, there's been 12,000 people across 24 different countries who've participated in this study. And what it clearly shows is that there is a belief within leaders of organizations or managers that remote working performance is lower, usually lower than that of people who work in an office setting. And I just want to take a moment to consider what that belief as a leader or a manager then informs our behaviors at work. So if we take from this study that over 40% of the managers surveyed believe that remote workers perform worse than in the office if they work remotely, that more than 40% are skeptical about motivation levels in the long term, and that the majority believe that they lack the confidence to manage their workers. You can start to see perhaps how some of these beliefs might be affecting how we then in turn communicate, work, and lead our people remotely. There is also, however, another consideration, and even before the pandemic, again, lots of studies on this to show that people who do work from home do find it difficult or more challenging to motivate themselves. There is a definite factor that when you feel that you are also not having the choice to work from home, there is a difference that you can see here. If I choose to work from home, I am much more motivated than if I have no choice on where I work. Now, if we stop and think about the impact of that for a moment, COVID has forced the majority of us without our choice to work at home. So I wanted to draw this to your attention, that feeling that we have no choice about it can also affect our levels of motivation. The other question I just want you to reflect on as well is then, do you believe that remote working has a negative impact then on productivity? And you can probably, there are no prizes for guessing where this might be going. But what we can also see is that when we think about productivity, actually how we show up at work, the culture within an organization that enables us and equips us to be productive, there are some distinct changes that we have seen in the pandemic to that culture within an organization. And what you can see here is that how remote workers experience being managed at home has definitely changed. And this is showing up in a number of ways. A couple you can see here, that the feelings from employees that they are being much more closely monitored. If I'm not visible, if I can't see the people that I work with, I must need to put more measures and metrics into place. The unintended consequence of that is that it's this feeling that I'm not trusted. So it can be things like, over the past week, I was expected to respond much more quickly to electronic messages or emails than I was if I was in the office. And it's actually this feeling of being more micromanaged or scrutinized that decreases productivity. And it can be an unintended consequence of you as a business owner or leader just not being around your people. You can't see them. I don't know what they're doing. So we naturally can overcompensate for that sometimes. But ultimately, that's what's increasing anxiousness at work as well. And we know, again, from mental health reports and statistics, that anxiety at work has increased. So it's just thinking about some of these factors for your teams and your people that's so important as well. Now, we're going to be looking in a later webinar at change and the impact and how we can lead people through change. But I just wanted to reference here the work of William Bridges on how people transition and experience change. because I think we are definitely finding this in our work that we're doing with organizations is very, very helpful. So when you look at this slide and you think about how we experience change, you can also see how the effect of the pandemic has further exacerbated our feelings of being in this situation. And as extensions to lockdown have continued, as Jo said at the beginning, we're finding that people might be struggling to engage with work as the lockdown continues. So when you look at this slide, what you're seeing here is that when we have a change in our life, in our world, we go through feelings that can be frustration. We don't like being in this situation. We might have feelings of confusion or, anger. We're frustrated with this now. We're bored of it. But what I want you to notice here is how that affects our productivity and our morale. So when we're getting a bit fed up of COVID and we're working in a very different way and we wish things could be different, do you notice here what's happening to productivity? It's actually that energy, that engagement that's going down. It's making it much harder to have good days at work as we continue to live in this situation. But from a manager's perspective, what we need to do is to have people on the right-hand side of this curve. Because while we might not like the pandemic or what it's forcing us to work in, we need to accept the situation. And it's only when we can start to accept the situation that we can increase engagement, get experimentation at work and start to bring that energy up again. So just bear in mind that the 3 impacts that COVID will be having when we talk about change is the scale of the change. It's affected every single element of our life, how we live, how we work, how we socialize, how we exercise. It's also as well affected by the duration of the change. How long is this going to go on for? As leaders, you don't have the answers to that question either, nor do the government right now. And that creates uncertainty. And the longer that the uncertainty goes on as well, the more we can be feeling more in this, things are harder to do. Now, I don't want that to sound like doom and gloom, because there's definitely things that you can do. And these are the tips I want to share with you. But just have this in your mind when you're dealing with people and working with people, that it's having this dampening down effect on our energy. So I want to share some practical tips with you. And the first one is to think about the culture in your organization. How is that set up at the moment? You've all experienced a year of working remotely now. What have you learned through the last year? How is your culture set up to enable your teams to flourish or to work at their best at the moment? Do you remember we said earlier on that one of the unintended consequences or actions that we can have as managers when we're not in the office with our people and we can't see how busy people are, is that we tend to go into more management style. So focusing much more heavily on tactics, on metrics, on putting checks and balances in place. Now that's understandable, because as human beings, we like to control our environment. So you might feel as a leader or a manager that you've got a better handle on what's happening, but just remember that impact on your people. They feel less trusted, more scrutinized. So it's just to get this balance right of management to leadership. And what you can do as a leader is very much think about for yourself now, where are you on this set of scales? Do you feel that the times that you've been more in management, focusing on tactics and processes, checks and measures? Or do you feel that you've allowed your leadership to creep in, giving people motivation and inspiration? Where would you put yourself at the moment? And if we think about why leadership is important, it's about getting the right balance, or even getting the balance right. And it's a calibration. So what I also want to say is that as well, there are 3 things that you can do to build the culture, remote working, to help to motivate for any generation, no matter the age or the demographics of the people in your business. The first is to pull out what we call play. So play is really about making work engaging. Experimentation is what keeps people on the right-hand side of that change curve, if you remember. When we're in experimentation, we collaborate better. We like to problem solve. Humans love to be involved with problem solving. So as a leader, you don't need to have all the answers right now, but what you can do with your teams is ask them to maybe focus on what would give your clients or customers better value at the moment. How could you improve efficiencies and productivity working remotely? Draw on their curiosity and draw on their energy to get them working and collaborating together around a problem. In addition, focus on the purpose. You know, again, as a leader, you might be worrying about, I can't give a definitive answer to what our business is going to look like in 6 months or 12 months' time. I don't know whether we will be hybrid working. You may not have all the answers right now, but you need to give people hope. So remember that as a leader, sharing a vision with people is what really excites and engages people. So it's particularly helpful in times of uncertainty as well. So can you and your team revisit short-term goals to stay focused on the things that are making a difference right now? You don't have to have all the answers, but really get people to connect with why they love doing what they do or the difference they can make in this situation at the moment. And finally is to untap people's potential. Make sure you're giving people opportunities to expand their skills, to learn and to grow. If you're onboarding new people into your business, making sure that those new people have access to people from whom they can, already established into the business, colleagues whom they can collaborate with, regular informal meetings to share problems or how does work get done around here. So again, put learning and development and opportunities for people to collaborate will increase their motivation again. And just to give you some proof on this, again, we know that when experimentation, problem solving, creativity, collaboration is within the business and you make that an option for people, it increases employee motivation by 45% points of increase. So it's proven to actually make a big difference. Okay, so we've looked at culture, we've looked at play, purpose and potential, but what else can we do? So Jo mentioned there that, you know, some days it's just harder, isn't it, to get going at the moment. There's a bit of monotony about the way that we're living our lives at the moment. But a critical thing as a manager, and what we've seen with organizations who've really focused on this in the recent months, has made a massive difference. And that is to think about the energy that we have. There are only 24 hours in a day. So unless we consciously choose to think about how we orchestrate the energy for ourselves and those around us, this can make a massive difference to the motivation, to the morale, to the energy we bring to our work. So again, some of these challenges you might have experienced for yourself in the recent months. Again, evidence is suggesting, and I wonder yourself, if you were to take a look in your calendar now, how many hours of meetings have you got ahead for yourself in the next week at work? Interestingly, we know that time spent in meetings has more than doubled globally. And that's because we're having to put more meetings in to keep in touch with colleagues. But we've also found in our work in recent months that businesses have carried on running those meetings as they would have done when you were face to face. So my challenge here is to get you to think about how many of those meetings need to run in the way that you were doing them. Are there more innovative ways that you can spend time in meetings? Another thing to bear in mind is that we also know that over 40 billion more emails were delivered last month than compared to the same period the year before. Just think about how busy your inbox is. Plus also combined with these feelings of being less connected with managers and with colleagues at work, having less personal contact. So again, what can we do about this? So the first thing to think about is about energy. Why am I showing you a graph to do with energy cycles in humans? Well, I'll tell you why. Because you may be familiar with circadian rhythms. They're our natural sleep cycle. But we also know that we have a less familiar cousin, which is called the ultradian performance rhythm, which you can see here. If you take nothing away from this graph, it's to say that we have natural cycles of about 90 to 120 minutes of energy for a task. So if your meetings are going over 90 minutes, it's likely that most of your people will have tuned out. If you look at your diary, are you running back-to-back webinars, one meeting to the next without any breaks? Are you getting up earlier, forsaking your lunch break and just not getting that break at the end of the day? What we know is that when you don't take this healing response, which basically in simplistic terms means walking away from your laptop screen, going and getting some movement, we know that this has a direct effect on increasing burnout. So the impact of not taking regular reset breaks is less clarity of thinking, poorer decision making, and it actually takes you twice as long to do a task on a Friday than it would do on a Monday. So again, think about how you can optimize your energy, but also the energy and the time. And time is money, right? And productivity. So here's some top tips. These are things that we have been doing with businesses and some ideas that have worked in other companies from this last year as well. Look at your weekly routines in your diary. Are you actually getting energy breaks? As a leader, if you put those breaks in your diary, that's also signaling to your team to give them permission to do the same as well. So walk the talk, do it yourself. Can you challenge yourself and your team to reduce time spent in meetings? I worked with a team in America recently, and they actually sat and calculated that they could save around a third of their weekly time by reducing the time of their meeting, or actually not attending the whole of the meeting in some cases, just turning for the 20 minutes they were needed to be there rather than the whole hour. I also want to point out that being online also requires more energy. It increases our cognitive load. You have to work harder on a screen. So remember that for any meeting time, you get up to 30% of your energy is bled or drained working through a Zoom or Teams platform. So can you switch some to the telephone? Can you make some of these walking meetings? Can you reduce the amount of total time that you need to have in that meeting overall? And last but not least, I just want to go back to some of your hygiene factors for meetings as well. So some things that you can do is to what called supercharge your meeting agendas. So look at the purpose for your meeting, look at the outcomes that you want to achieve, get some clarity into why you're meeting, what's the purpose of the meeting, and then allocate clear time to your agenda. Also ask yourself the question, are the right people attending that meeting? And actually, do you have to attend at all? And one thing that we've noticed has been really helpful as well is to have some team meeting behaviors in place. So again, if you've got bigger group meetings, making sure everybody's got their video on, making sure that everybody is contributing, that everybody has a role to play, because that can stop people from disengaging in those meetings as well and actually be more engaged during the time that you have with them. Okay. So in summary, I just want you to think about the energy and what this means, because what we know is that when we're in this optimal performance zone, when we feel that we've got the right environment, that maybe your meetings are not taking 2 hours, but they're taking 30 minutes instead, we can absolutely concentrate for the optimal amount of time. You might also be having people who are towards the left-hand side of this stress performance curve. You may have members of your team who are furloughed, maybe concerned about their job, or maybe they've not got enough to do at the moment. So you may have some colleagues who are over here feeling a bit bored out, but equally, if you're not managing your energy, you can soon get into burnout, taking too much on. Now, Janet's going to be covering this in our second resilience webinar about how to use this on an individual level with your teams. But again, I would just draw your attention to this. Where are you on this stress performance curve? Again, we know that it's easy to schedule those back-to-back meetings and flit between tasks with no break. That's going to really put strain on your energy, and it's definitely going to lead you more to burnout in the longer term. So organizations and teams who put into place controls that can just check this, checks and balances, the small things will make a really big difference. And what we will be providing you with from this meeting in summary is a summary of some of these tips that I've shared with you today, and some additional ones as well that we really have found have been making a difference to businesses in lockdown. but will also be those critical steps and cultural steps that will help if you choose to go down a more hybrid way of working for the future as well. So things that you can do tomorrow back in the business or today, but also those tips and techniques that will help you for future working practices as well. Okay, so Jo, that's a summary from me. There may be some questions and answers in the chat function, which I'd be happy to take with you now.
That's great. Jayne, thank you so much. I can certainly relate to an awful lot of those points, and I really hope everyone's found something to take away, at least one or two things to take away from what Jayne has talked about today, because it's getting ourselves through these difficult times as best as we can. One lesson, I think, is I'm going to aim for a slightly more cheerful backdrop and more spring-like backdrop like Jayne's. I think that might help on the fun side of it and the positivity side of it. So I'll be exploring those after today's session. So you'll have to tune into the next one to see what my backdrop is.
Exciting, Jo, we will.
Yes. Couple of questions that have come in from the audience, and thank you for those. The first one is around slightly off topic from what Jayne's talking about, but you can chip in on this, Jayne, as well, but I can share some thoughts. Does an employer need to provide a desk, office chair, etc. for all, or only when asked for by the employee? We've had another similar one about what are the rights and obligations, responsibilities on employers in terms of home office setup. I can throw in some thoughts here first, which are, we as employers, everyone is covered by health and safety legislation and is required to provide a safe place of work for their employees. Now that covers an office environment, any kind of workforce environment, but also anyone who is working at home. I suspect things have slid slightly during the pandemic, and certainly the early stages when people were in crisis and were perched on the edge of sofas, on the corners of beds, and just getting the work done as best they could. But as things have continued, it is absolutely an obligation on employers to ensure that their employees have a safe place to work, and that includes appropriate equipment. So the burden is on employers to check that their employees have appropriate equipment. And for office workers, that's primarily a good chair and a good appropriate desk as best that can be managed in the home environment. So that's the sort of legal answer to that, I guess. Jayne, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
Certainly, Jo, and thank you for covering the legalities, because that's out of my area of expertise. I think my question back would be, if that is going to help your people work better, then that's a massive hygiene factor. So again, the more the environment that you can help support your team with at home is only going to help them do their job better. So I would argue that if you didn't do it, then that's going to have a more negative effect on their performance, their productivity, their ability to be able to sit at their desk and get their job done. We all know, don't we, that it's much easier to be in a productive zone when you're comfortable, when you've got the right setup, and much harder to concentrate if you haven't. So I would say absolutely. And it could be, again, an opportunity for them to feel valued. If that's not being provided, then how does that make me feel about, the situation working from home? We know this is going to go on for a lot longer as well. So anything that you can do to make your team feel set up and ready is a massive signal from you, your commitment and investment in them and their well-being as well.
Thanks, Jayne. A follow-up question on that. Someone has asked, can an employee work from bed rather than at a desk or table, even if this could lead to occupational health issues? Which is a great question. It takes me back to homeschooling and trying to get kids out of bed and sitting up to do their lessons. and interesting that people are having the same issue with their employees. As Jayne has just said, there's all sorts of common sense reasons why you would want an employee to be sitting at a desk rather than in bed. There's all sorts of presentational and brand reasons as well, of course, but operationally doing your job sitting up at a desk rather than lying down. Again, from a legal point of view, I think it's a lawful and reasonable instruction to an employee that they get out of bed to do their job, and therefore it would be potentially a disciplinary issue, I think, if you had an employee that felt that they weren't prepared to get out of bed to do their job. So that would be my answer to that one.
Yeah.
Another one, one final question that's come through as well, and Jayne, I'll ping this one to you first. Yep. Any examples of innovative ways of catching up with the team?
Oh, great question. Yes. So, right, let me draw on some examples from the last few months or the recent few months. Informal catch-ups, really important, because again, do you remember what we were just talking about here was understanding really what's going on for people in their own personal lives is massively important at the moment. So it's leaders or managers, you can have informal check-ins with people, definitely do that. Preferably on the screen, but also off the screen. If you've got too much Zoom going on, doing it offline is really helpful as well. So the informality, making sure you know what's going on in people's lives. So other innovative things that people have been doing, there's been a lot of social things going on. I know Myerson have been brilliant at that as well. So working lunches with teams, have been sending boxes of food home, doing some informal afternoon teas or coffees, that kind of equivalent of the virtual coffee catch up, massively important. That's the glue of your organization, those informal conversations. Other things that people have been doing is what's called agile working approaches. So again, getting teams to come up with solutions or problems and then giving them short sprints of meetings where they collaborate in small groups. So coming together once a week for 20 minutes to brainstorm around a particular problem, but doing it in a fun, creative way. I've had managers who've sent boxes of things every week to each other. So they've got a plant on the desk, something on their desk environment to change the environment up. And we've also had teams who've been doing Wellbeing Wednesdays. So you come together and just talk about things that are going on at home. So that's a wellbeing thing, or things that they're doing to really support their resilience at work as well. And then last but not least, a couple of things that have happened recently this week were teams just sending photographs to each other on a WhatsApp group, having an informal chat running along on an informal group as well. And also, last but not least, teams who have been doing what they call action learning groups. So again, collaborating across the business to share insights from outside, news, updates, things that are happening outside of the business, to try and then look at staying ahead of the curve, what's happening in their sector. So action learning groups, informal catch-ups with people, things that provide energy for people, and also some weekly topics on those Wellbeing Wednesdays. I've had companies doing mindfulness sessions for 5 minutes with a practitioner, yoga at work, things that can really help with well-being and resilience and positivity. So again, I can send you some tips and some suggestions on that as well from today.
Jayne, thank you. That was really comprehensive. But yes, it's thinking about new and different ideas, and you come up with an idea and everyone does it. And we all did cocktail making before Christmas, and we were all very excited about that, and that was brilliant. And then you move on and try and do the next one. We've just done a great online quiz night with the team, which was with snacks and drinks, and that went really well. Yeah. Another thing is, and as social distancing rules allow, is can you meet someone in a park and go for a walk, and get away from your screen completely, and as the weather gets a bit better, that's another idea as well, isn't it?
And Jo, that's a really important one. You know, movement, we looked at the ultradian rhythms, didn't we? Again, encouraging your teams to get out. So again, teams have been sending on their WhatsApp group pictures of where they went for a walk. Also had some teams who were doing 10,000 steps a day challenge to raise money for charity. You can tie it into something that's, you know, maybe a corporate charitable function that you support. It brings that energy and movement in, but it gets people bonding as well, because until we can go back to face in some way, it just helps people to stay connected as well.
Great, thank you. Well, that covers the questions. Thank you for those. So, and I'm conscious of the time, so let's draw things to a close now. But as I said, I really hope you've all found that helpful. We will be sending around the video, the slides, and Jayne's supplementary top tip information to you as well. Just a reminder, as on the slide, our next session is on the 22nd of April, and Jayne's colleague Janet Grant will be presenting that on improving resilience in yourself and your teams, something people talk about a lot in these times, but as Jayne's highlighted how important that is just to keep people engaged and for productivity. So really hope you'll come along to that, and we will send you the joining instructions for that as well. So thanks once again for joining us today, and we hope to see you very soon. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jo. Thanks, everyone.